Hi, I'm Andy Weibel, and welcome to Timely Topics. Today, I think we have a pretty timely topic, something that's been in our schools and taking over school board meetings, and that's banned books. And to talk to us today about banned books is one of our finest English teachers, instructor of English, Sean Koklicher. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you're an instructor of English here. How long have you been here now?
This is the start of my fifth year.
Fifth year, all right. Wow. Seems like yesterday you showed up.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
But you're also in charge of the Honors Society, the English Honors Society, and they celebrated Banned Book Week earlier in the semester. And so I thought maybe we'd start there, say what happened here at the college with Banned Book Week and why did that occasion take place?
Perfect. So Sigma Kappa Delta, the two-year English Honor Society that's on campus, every year we work to take on an activity that we think is important for the campus at large. And so with all of the challenges that were coming into the start of this school year across the nation, I decided that I wanted to have us do something in regards to banned books. And so we constantly are giving books away because we want to encourage reading for our students, but we decided that this year what we wanted to do in conjunction with Banned Book Week was to hand out banned books. Okay. And so with that, what we did is we took all of our books that we collected and we wrapped them in brown paper and just wrote the reasons, the violations, the problems with the books on the covers. And we had roughly 200 plus novels that we gave away in under an hour and a half.
Wow. So the students were pretty receptive to these.
They were receptive. We did it across 2 days. You know, we planned to do it for a much longer period of time. We didn't realize the books would go that quickly. And we had students, in all honesty, that came on the first day and grabbed books and then returned the second day having already read the books, asked us to rewrap those books so that we could give them to others and grab more books to take home with them.
Now, were these books that you gave out, were they ones that had been recently or historically banned or both?
Both. So what we did is we took the list of the top 10 current banned books. And so we took that list and I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought all of those because some of them were new and we couldn't get them as a used copy. And then the rest of them, there's a place in Muskegon referred to it. It's called Embrace Book. They give books away free twice a month.
Okay.
And so we gave our students the historical list of banned books, and we sent our students to Embrace Books to collect as many of those banned books as they could.
Yeah.
And that's what we.
Okay, wonderful. And so. Banned books, I mean, this is not something new, but we have been seeing an increased discussion about it. And as mentioned, I think about 1,600 books have been banned recently in the last year or so. But it's not new. I mean, how long have people been banning books? It's probably when we first had a book. But
books have been banned for longer than we can really imagine. You know, if we go back and back and back and back, there's always been a reason to ban something, and it's usually in the old days. If we go back to ancient China and things along those lines, it's books that we are trying to remove that speak against the political power, and we want to make sure that we take those out so that we can rewrite history, so that we can dominate what it is
and
that
keep
we
in
want
power.
to do.
Yeah.
And so as we've moved that pendulum forward, you know, we get into around the time of World War II, you know, leading into that time period where the Nazis got to a point where they were doing a big part of burning and removing anything that might speak to the way of living life that goes counter to what they were trying to push out. And so we saw a lot of that where they were cleaning out their libraries, they were cleaning out people's homes, they were removing those works and just taking them out so that there'd be no access to them whatsoever. And that started roughly around like the 30s. And then we, you know, had our own flaws in that same realm when we hit the 1950s and we have the Red Scare in the United States. and we started accusing everybody of being communist, one of the
Right.
first things we did was run out and start grabbing all of the books. We go after, the books that we think are important. And all of those then, even in that 1950s, we went after the simplest of things, going after comic books, because we believed that comic books were poisoning and corrupting children. And we had gigantic comic book burning events in the United States to get rid of your Supermans and your Spider-Mans, but also getting rid of things like Tales from the Crypt and things along those lines. That this has been a historical piece for the United States, that during that time period from the 50s through the 70s, which was pretty much the darkest time in the United States for banning books and challenging books, we are at a point now where we are banning and challenging books at a rate that we haven't seen in any recent time.
History. So it's kind of been cyclical, but we're at a higher
We
level
are.
in that. I know the Nazis, they were burning books, as you mentioned, that went against their beliefs, maybe that supported Jews, that supported homosexuals at a time, and they had book burnings and all that there. Today, what are we seeing that's sparking an interest to ban a book? I don't think it's communism anymore.
Well, I mean, the thing is, even the books that were banned, because of communism, we'll call them socialist novels now.
Okay.
That's kind of taken over the isms, So if we have something that we deem to be a socialist novel,
Okay.
we will go after it and we will remove a book along those lines. But the majority of the attacks that we have on books currently will be anything that is reflective and representative of the LGBTQ movement. If we have that piece out
Right.
there, we see a lot of bans on those. We see a lot of works that are banned that are told from minority perspectives. So you have a lot of book challenges to African American literature and Hispanic literature as well. And then we do have a lot of books that get challenged that may reflect police, according to some people, in a negative light.
Okay.
And so they don't want those books circulated as well.
Mm-hmm. And why is it thought to be wrong to talk about those issues? I mean,
That's a loaded question with
know.
a lot of.
I mean, they're banning them they don't want kids to read these things, I guess. So,
So if we go through and you take the bill that was passed in Florida, the Don't Say Gay bill, that it's been lovingly termed, and you look at what they're saying, and they make the argument in there that K through 3 cannot have books that openly represent anything to deal with homosexual inclinations or society or people or anything along those lines. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then they add on the back end of that bill or age appropriateness moving forward into the rest of the ages. And so what happens is we look at these works, you take something as simple as, And Tango Makes Three, which has been on the list of banned children books for quite a while right now.
And that looks like it's made for a younger
And
child.
it is. This is made for ages 4 to 8,
Okay.
And so it is a young reader book. And so the concept of this book is you have our two loving penguins,
Yeah.
but they are a homosexual couple that cannot have a child of their own. And
Okay.
so they are given an egg and they raise it and then they have a family. This is a true story. Okay, so we take this story that goes in that is actually set, I think it's in the Brooklyn Zoo, that we're now coming after and saying, wow, look, we have a problem with true stories about animals, but it's representation about families. And we're saying we have a problem with this family, and we don't want representation in our literature for people to see this. So we've gotten to a point where we're banning literature that for a certain sect of American society is saying we don't respect that depiction of family. And by doing so, we're removing pieces of literature from children who have been marginalized, and groups that have been marginalized for centuries. And now we're saying we're going to delegitimize who you are, your families, your way of life, because we don't want anyone to be able to connect with that or see that it is the reality that we live in. If we remove it and hide it, then we can continue to push a narrative that it doesn't exist or that it's wrong or that it's bad.
that it's not. I don't want my kids to see that, to think that's all right.
Correct.
Even though it is all right and it happens in nature, and this is a true story.
Correct.
The one I find that of a concern of being of the LGBTQ community, but also you bring up persons of color, and that being a reason to have a book that's banned. Can you give an example? And it just seems, haven't we gotten rid of racism, or is that not what's going on here?
I think that, we can say that we've gotten rid of racism, but I think that we know by the books and the ones that are being challenged that we use different reasons for why we ban it. Okay, so if we take a book like Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which I just taught this semester in my Comp 102, which I teach as a banned book class. And Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, that came out in 1970, has been one of the top 10 banned books historically. So, it is always top 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go after this story, and one of the reasons that people go after it is they talk about the fact that there is some sexuality that's used inside of this book. So we do have the assault and the rape of a young girl at the hands of her father. We do have a member that used to be a member of the church who was a religious man who stepped away from that is also has conversations about taking advantage of young girls. And so we have a book along those lines that's the reason for why we go after it. But we know at the exact same time that when we look at books that delve into other, if we use the words, if we go into more Caucasian or majority reflective literature, there's a lot of those same issues that exist inside of those books, but we're not challenging them.
I see.
Because by and large, when you have an African-American novelist and the author that's there are issues inside of it that don't always paint the most nice depictions of white society, because historically we know that is a depiction that needs to be addressed. And so you take a book like this that is set in the 1970s, that is written in the 1970s, but set in the 1940s, we have that ability to look in and we get a historical lesson of this is how life was like living in a predominantly black neighborhood that is separated by a line from white society. And we see those issues, and those have crept up in literature for decades.
Right.
You go back to Richard Wright, we have those same things where he's talking about the black belt in Chicago and showing that separation and the impacts that separation has, but we want to remove those books because there is some murder in the book or there is some sexuality inside of the book. And we're not realizing that we're missing the core point of the conversation and that students need to have these conversations.
Right.
And if it's facilitated, in a way, and it's done appropriately, the students understand the reasons from where the stories are coming from. And they learn more from it than if you're just sending them off into a closet to read something on their own because you've told them that they shouldn't read this.
Right.
They're going to find it anyway.
Yeah.
And now there is no conversation that takes place to get them to understand the deeper meaning behind what the author themselves was trying to convey.
Yeah, well said. So then I guess the idea, though, for those who are challenged is that they don't want their kids to think of their grandparents or others as racist. Don't call me racist. So any book that would suggest that is one that they should be protected from. So
It's that
kind of
concept, yep.
rewriting history.
We are trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, whitewash that concept. We know that part of the big issue with the banned book movement that's happened right now is the concept of critical race theory. We know that we throw CRT around all day long. And so the majority of them will say, we're teaching CRT in our K through 12 schools, which those of us at the collegiate level know that it's a theory that doesn't even get introduced into classrooms until you're at the collegiate level. It's a way of interpreting all kinds of things,
Right.
from laws to literature to whatever we want to put into that category. But we latch onto that piece where we say, oh, we're teaching critical race theory because what we're teaching our students is that this is inherent in everybody, that racism and white supremacy and all of those things has been systemic forever. And if we put that out there, we're making our, I guess the best way of putting it, we're making our white children feel like we're piling on them,
guilty or bad.
and for what it is, and we're making them feel guilty and we're making them feel bad. But what we're not realizing at the exact same time, by taking these conversations and these books away, we are telling our African American students that there's something wrong with you as well. I heard at one point a parent was talking about banning a story, and the reason behind the argument for taking something out that dealt with race was, I don't want my child to learn about racism as a young child. And this was
keep
delivered.
them innocent.
Yep, keep them innocent. And the response back from a black parent was, well, it's nice that you get to shield your child from that reality, but my child has to deal with it every single time they walk out the door. So the literature opens those conversations so that students can realize that we are equal, that we are all in this together. But if we're constantly shielding and removing literature from those conversations, if the children don't see it in their daily lives and they don't see it from their parents, when are they going to learn it? When it's too late, when they're adults and they're confronted with something that they don't understand because it's been taken away from them.
Right. There is some type of protecting kids from something when they're younger.
Yes.
And I think some are sexual themes that come into books that cause them to be banned. Now you might say, it's tied to these other issues as well. So is it right to have some books that are geared towards someone younger, not just in the toughness of reading it, but of subject matter? Are there some limits that should be put in there?
So I would say, it depends on how we look at that question and we take it on. So if we look at books the same way that we look at television shows and movies, we know that every TV show and every movie has a rating.
Right.
And so if you watch an R-rated movie, you know what the expectation is when you approach an R-rated movie. And so books, by and large, for themselves, they do have those ratings. They have age appropriateness that's attached to them, from young adult fiction to adult fiction to children's literature, those things. We have those pieces that are there. We know that if we walk into the library, right, and I decide that I'm going to go into the children's section where there's illustrated books, I would walk in here and I would be able to, if I'm in that age group of 4 to 8, I can walk in and I can pick up this book. But I know at the exact same time, this is also an illustrated book. Well, this is not going to be shelved in the exact same place that this is.
Right.
But at the exact same time, it is accessible because the American Library Association says anyone and everyone who comes into the library has free access to the literature that's here. But what we have to realize is that if a child is going in and choosing a book like this, where it's a story about a young girl coming to terms with her own sexuality and coming out, if a child is going into the library and seeking this book out, they're seeking the book out for a reason. They're not just wandering into the library and grabbing a book and going, ooh, and finding those things, because they are separated by age. And so we understand that. And so they're librarians, which are our first, defense in all of this. They understand these pieces, and they understand if a child walks up with a book that they deem might be a little bit too advanced for them or deal with some subject matter that they shouldn't have, they do have the ability, especially at school libraries. The public libraries carry everything. School libraries pick and choose which books they house, how they house them, how they stack them, how they put those out. So there is some gatekeeping that's there.
Right.
We have to put our faith and our trust in the librarians who have studied and gone through and gotten their degrees and understand how to pick and choose these books and what's appropriate for children of certain ages and what's not, and trust that rather than coming in and telling them how to do their job because we personally have deemed this book inappropriate.
Yeah, I know, though, that some might reply that, and I saw this at Spring Lake High School, which recently got rid of Genderqueer, a book that I think is #1 on banning. And they said, well, we didn't exactly ban it. It's still available to students, but it has to be signed off by your parent and a counselor, I believe, that you can have access to it.
Yes.
Is that banning a book, or is that just
It is
making it a little safer for
It's
kids.
banning a book because you're taking the book out of the general circulation. You're not
Okay.
allowing anyone to have access to this book. And now you're stigmatizing somebody and marginalizing someone who wants that book. And you're saying, we're going to determine whether or not you can read something.
Mhm.
And so once we put rules and regulations in place on how we access something, then you are banning that book.
Right.
Even if it's still housed on the campus, you're telling everyone you have to have special permission to see this.
Right.
And I think that that's problematic because we are removing it from anyone who has access. And if I have to walk into the library and say, I would like to meet with a counselor because I want to check out a
Mhm.
book, you're already labeling that student as different from the rest of the population.
And so it effectively, I would think, means it's not going to be read.
I think that you would cause a number of students to steer away from reading
Yeah.
that book because they don't want to be labeled.
Right. If they're thinking about or just want to know a bit more about being non-binary, or they probably don't want to get their parents' signature for that. They want to explore it on their own first.
Exactly.
Right. You have maybe want to point out another book or two that
Sure.
that's commonly banned that might. I
So-
know you got a nice stack there.
Yeah, so Alex Gino, you have this nice elementary school book, George. It is now currently titled Melissa. So the name has changed. I just don't have the new version because they just
Okay.
released that recently. And so the book, when it first came out, is called George. And it is about Melissa, who her dead name would be George. And so
I
we
see.
see this young girl or this young boy at the start who identifies and knows that she is a girl. I know that I'm a girl, and the story comes through where we're doing this, but everybody around Melissa refers to Melissa constantly as George.
Yeah.
The parents don't accept, that piece, even though Melissa keeps it hidden from her parents because she's afraid of how
They're going to
her
react.
mother will react to
Yeah.
this. And so you have this story that goes through where it's basically just this young girl where we are trying to understand the concept of acceptance of who she is. And so as Melissa goes through this story, and she has her best friend, Kelly, who accepts her, and allows her to be who she is. And as the story unfolds, we find out that Melissa's older brother, who's in high school, also accepts Melissa for who she is. And the mother at the start is a little, uncertain, but is willing to
Give
work
it a
through
go,
to
yeah.
allow her daughter to become who she knows she is. And so at the exact same time, we have bullies in the book that bully Melissa because, of who she is.
Mhm.
And so I think that you have a book like this that is trying to understand and get us to understand that concept of acceptance and inclusion and things along those lines, that by removing this story, we are right off the bat saying anyone like Melissa, we don't
Except or
who you are, and we're not going to allow that conversation to
Yeah.
take place.
right.
And we're going to shield our other students from that. So you have to show up and present the way we want you to present.
Right.
But if you have a book like this that students are allowed to read, I think that it changes those perceptions, even so much that the author, themselves realized, when I wrote this book, maybe even myself was doing something wrong by using the name George.
Yeah. And so it's changing.
And so the first step was they released stickers. And so if you owned a copy of
You could
this,
put
you
it-
could order the Melissa sticker to put it over. And now the book is only sold with the Melissa label.
Right.
But I think that that's even an evolution and a learning process as we go through all of those things, which I think is what we should all be doing.
Right.
And the literature helps those conversations.
Sure. That word taboo in the past or didn't
Exactly.
take place. Yeah.
Exactly.
This has been an interesting discussion about reasons why people are banning books, and I did look at the reasons, and I was surprised. Violence is not so much one that's in there to ban books. Seems like that would be one you'd want to protect kids from, but it's more of these other natures of sex, race, sexual content. Are we focusing on the right things, you think?
I mean, are we focusing on the right thing is a very, individual concept, because
Yeah.
I know that we watch a lot of television, we watch a lot of movie, and we know that when we go to the theaters for the big blockbusters that people take everybody to, we go for the violence, we go for the explosions, we go for all of those things. And even if there is some component inside of the story that has some sexual relationships that go in there that maybe we find problematic in our daily lives, we're okay going and watching the big explosions because that's what we pay the money to go and
Yeah.
see. And so violence is one of those things, I think, by and large, has been ingrained into American culture for a really long time. So if we go back, to television and film, from the golden age and the silver age and all of these things, we put forth all kinds of film that actually depicted military might in America, and we saw those things, and we've never let that go. We've always kept those pieces in the literature not the literature, but the films that we put out there. And so I don't think that when we depict those pieces, even though you can have some really difficult reads around war and violence that have nothing to do with sexuality, and those kind of violence on that realm, I think that it becomes problematic when we look at this and say, we're going to pick and choose what we find offensive. And it always seems to be when we're picking and choosing what we find offensive, it is alienating specific groups. And we can look at that for anything. If we go back to when music started to get their labels that were put on them, for parental advisory, and we go back and we realize, the very first person to start that off was Prince. Okay, so when he does Darling Nikki and Tipper Gore is like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that my daughter heard this song. And then we push that piece forward and we go after, Two Live Crew, and we start putting labels on music. Well, those groups in and of themselves were marginalized groups, and we're going after, not that music didn't exist before.
Right.
And it's the same thing with literature. We see those things in other realms, but it becomes problematic when everything that we seem to be targeting large scale is targeting the issues of literature that is put out by marginalized groups.
Right. Well said. But and so I think you also are bringing up, we're talking about books, but it really has a broader effect on society. We're talking about, I do some research in LGBTQ studies, and a long time ago, not recently, but I was having trouble searching the internet from the college because they had restrictions on it that I couldn't bring up. And I was like, wait, I'm not looking at pornography. But that's what they were putting it in with.
Right.
It just lumped it all together and wasn't thought through clearly. And so I think reading these books and getting this exposure out there helps people to think through it more clearly, and that's why we need them.
We do need them, and we need the conversations, and we need to not take things out of hands of people that need them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that's what we're doing right now, is we're taking literature away from people that actually need them.
So the bans harm people.
They do.
And especially those who are most marginalized or those who have already been harmed.
And by taking those out, again, we're labeling people in ways that we shouldn't be labeling them. And now we're doing it through literature. And we have to realize that we need these books in the hands and available to the students who need them. But at the exact same time, even the book bans and the challenges that go through, all you're doing now is you're bringing attention to books for people that don't need those books.
Yeah.
And you're opening that up to people now saying, well, I need to get a copy of that.
Right.
Well, I need to get a copy of that. I want to know why it was banned.
Yeah.
And so you're defeating your own purpose
Right.
that you're trying to do.
In many ways, the exposure is, makes these bestsellers the ones that are most
Exactly.
banned. So in some ways it backfires.
Yes.
Right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us today talking about banned books with Sean Koklicher. He's our instructor of English at Muskegon Community College. I'm sure he'd love for you to join his classes. And if you want to contact him to learn more about book bans and what you can do about it. And until next time, I'm Andy Weibel. Thanks for watching Timely Topic. Have a good day.